you need a system with an opinion, but you can still have flexibility. But if you have a system that's flexible with no opinion, then it's almost the same as having no system at all.
Hello, system thinkers. Welcome to The Question, a live collaborative learning show committed to broadening your perspective on design systems. I'm your host, Ben Callahan, founder of Sparkbox and Redwood's design system community, and you're listening to the episode 077 Deep Dive with Lauren LoPrete, where we're discussing culture versus compliance in design systems. If you have a moment, please get subscribed to the show out at bencallahan.com/thequestion. Let's get into it. Lauren, give us sort of an overview of what's happening in your world. I know you're recently in a new role, and you and I have talked a lot about this topic in sort of many different formats before, but what has this top of mind for you in this moment?
Yeah, so I'm in a new role. This is my fourth design systems lead position, fifth system, because that block I kind of led two systems and combining one. And every time I start working on a new system, I really have to spend a lot of time absorbing the culture around it to make decisions about how to lead. And earlier in my career, when I went maybe to the second system, I was trying to apply a lot of learnings that just weren't meshing with that culture. And it was kind of a negative result in my experience at that place until I figured out that I had to change. And what one of those things was really struggling to get adoption, um, and making an assumption that I needed leadership to mandate adoption. And I really spent a lot of time in that role, pressuring leadership to get them to be the authority that said people had to do it. And eventually I just gave up, and everything kind of started to get better after I did that. I found ways to influence kind of bottom up, found people just directly above me that could really be bought in. And so I really think about, especially in this age where not only humans are governing systems, but also agents, how that balance of culture versus compliance is playing out.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, and it's something that I think I heard you say in a talk, Lauren, once, that design systems are culture work in disguise, essentially. And I think when I heard you say that, this was years ago, I think maybe at a schema or something. Years ago, I remember thinking, "Oh, I could be friends with this. I could be friends with this woman." And so here we are, years later, and still talking about this, right?
Totally. I mean, there's a whole new perspective on it now,
Yeah,
I think.
that's true. Yeah. So the context and question for this week are here. So if you if you need a refresher on what we specifically asked you, we had 4 questions this week. We gave you 3 that were sort of choose a single option from those, from a list. And the first one was, how much do you believe that culture change approaches like community, relationships, shared values outperform compliance approaches like mandates, gates, and enforcement for long-term design system health? Gave you a series of choices. The second was, what's the primary mechanism that your team uses to drive design system adoption? And we gave you a series of choices to choose from there. The third, who is held accountable for design system adoption within your organization? And again, a series of choices. And then one open text question. Describe a moment when you chose to relinquish control and tell us what happened. Beautiful answers, beautiful stories in those last, and the answers to that last question especially. And a lot of them mirror what you started us with, Lauren, which was you were sort of grasping at control, grasping for authority. And when you finally chose to let go, that's when more positive movements started to happen. And so because of all those interesting sort of stories, each time I've been trying to kind of give us a mood of the episode, a mood of the answers. And so I chose hard won equanimity this week, which I had to go look this up. I was trying to find the right word for this, but it came back to this sort of almost like a Buddhist principle. So I'm not specifically a practicing Buddhist, but this statement kind of really resonated for me as I was reading the answers. And it said, a profound state of mental balance and stability that reminds that remains undisturbed by life's emotional upheavals, the ability to accept events as they occur without clinging or aversion, empowering you to observe reality clearly while maintaining a warm, compassionate, and engaged heart. And it's funny because a lot of these episodes we get sort of down on our scenarios, but there was like a little bit more of like a positivity to the answers this time where it's like, you know what? I know I don't have this control. I've chosen to give some things up, but I'm actually seeing the benefits of that. So it was kind of like a cool balance to some of the episodes where we've had maybe more challenging responses. Um, oh no, our link to the raw data is gone. If somebody, I'll grab that and drop it back in. But we sent this out to over 1,100 design system practitioners, and we got 61 responses this week. So, as always, you can get the link to the raw data. I'll drop that back in here in a moment. But Lauren, where do you want to start? We've got a lot of interesting data points here. But
Yeah, I just dropped a quote in from Leonard Cohen that actually I have taped on the top of my monitor that says, if you don't become the ocean, you'll be seasick every day. And I feel like I need to remind myself of that every day in this type of work. And that really reminded me of kind of the mood of the episode as well.
yeah, that's such a good quote. What is that from? Do you know? Or I'll have to look it up.
Honestly, I heard it from a design leader at in a
Yeah,
recent all hands and was like, okay, yes,
perfect.
in this moment, yes.
Yeah, love it, love it. Okay, I'm going to track that one down. Um, so in the more quantitative answers, I kind of did a quick summary. You can always kind of see those in the FigJam files, but it's like this first question was about like your belief around these things. The second question was more about like the mechanism at play in your organization, right? For this stuff. So it's interesting because over 65% of us kind of hedged a bit, right? Nobody kind of wanted to commit, so we went with somewhat. Um, but what you see if you combine that is like over 85% are saying that culture kind of matters at least as much as compliance, right? So that's a huge, like if you combine these top two, that's a lot, that's significant. And then in the sort of more like the reality of our scenarios, only about 30% of us chose this community or relationship building approach as sort of the primary mechanism. So the interesting thing to note was like comparing these two, while we had over 85% stating their culture change was sort of like at least as important as compliance, a much lower amount of us have that as our reality. And so, there's a difference between kind of what we as practitioners and leaders of systems believe should be the ideal and what the actual reality is. So, I don't know and I know, Lauren, you had you had a statement or a thought about this. You want to share that?
Yeah, I was thinking about like they're not necessarily exactly parallel. Some culture change can actually be from top down pressure. If you have leadership that's really bought into your vision, um, it can look very different than a mandate from those people too. And so, like, I'm curious to hear about the people that maybe had mixed responses across these two that were maybe like lean towards culture, but then chose mandates or top down pressure for the mechanism. If there was
Yeah.
anyone that had that flip.
Yeah. And this is where the session opens up, right? So raise your hand in Zoom if you would like to answer a question. That'll kind of get you in order at the top of my screen so we can get you into the conversation. And if you have a new topic or a question you want to ask the community, you can use the green check mark. So that's under Zoom React. There's a little green check mark, looks kind of like this. Just says yes next to it. So if you want to jump right in by raising your hand to answer Lauren's question, and then we'll keep the convo going. Jump in, Erin.
I posted it in the chat as well, but I think the timing of mandates is really critical and maturity of the system. We've experienced kind of like highs and lows with that in terms of early on we had mandates come out, but it was before the system was really ready. And that just set us up for failure and disappointment for consumers. And then now that we're ready, we find we aren't really getting mandates. And I don't necessarily even want the mandate to say to use our thing, but I would love a mandate to say stop building new things.
Hmm.
There are many systems at our company, and they all have value. And so to me, I feel like it's kind of a cheap out to build a new thing because you just don't want to try to work with someone else that already has done something. Um, so I always feel like that's like this weird out for people. It's like, well, that would be hard, and I have to collaborate with someone, so I'm going to make a new thing all by myself. But timing,
Yeah.
timing has proven whether a mandate is positive or not for us.
Erin, so just to clarify, when you say a mandate that says don't build a new thing, you're not talking about like product experience. You're talking about system. Don't build a
System.
new system.
Sure. Yeah. Sorry. Always
Yeah.
new and innovate. Great. New
Yes.
design system when there are many. Maybe not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you for
Yeah.
clarifying. Yeah.
No, that's super helpful, Erin. Thoughts on that, Lauren?
I mean, I've felt that pain several times, I think, uh, and it usually came from people not understanding how flexible a system can be and how the system can be that like gateway to unlocking future evolutions of things. Um, Oftentimes, and I think people's mindset about systems has changed a lot in the last like 18 months as they see that it's kind of like the foundation of everything we can build with agents now. But like I've been in companies where they were like, oh, we need a new design system because we're like a different style of product, like brand
Mm.
wise. And it's like, that's just a theme. And then it's like a lot of educating around theming, um, but not like truly a new system is necessary there.
Yeah. It's funny. That's a tricky balance to walk. So I think we should dive in a little bit more there. But Peter, I'll get you into the conversation here.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, the way that I found the most success kind of getting a design system adopted has been a lot of bit of column A and a little bit of column B, where column A is your culture. So like at Venmo, we really kind of started by kind of building out what we wanted together to a certain degree, so that there was that investment by design and engineering together. But there was a moment where the whole thing nearly collapsed because, I was part of the product team that like needed to build the foundations for that system. And product wanted to move forward without building any of the system components. So no components, no tokens, no anything. And but for where the mandate aspect of it comes in, my head of design kind of like threw down the hammer to support me to say, you can't use any of the new kind of brand style or guidelines at all unless you build it as tokens and as components. And I was already aligned culturally with engineering that, we were on the same side together within this product. So, but we just needed to kind of get past that product layer of like, why do we bother needing this thing? Because they didn't see value. So like, yeah, like we had done like 90% of the work at the cultural level, but then we needed that like less little 10% mandate, and not even like a persistent forever kind of thing, just like a moment where that mandate came in to kind of really throw down that hammer to say, no, it's like this way or not. So I think you need a little bit of column A, a little column B, but I think you have to start with column A before you can kind of um, have that kind of mandate be effective and not quite so punitive.
Yeah, that hits at Erin's timing thing too. It's just like there are like these moments in like the life cycle of systems and products where a big choice is made that kind of sets it's like a path that we're that we're choosing, a left or a right, and if the mandate's not there at that right time, it can like lead to a lot of different variety of approaches, which is really hard to rein in later. So yeah, I love that timing. Greg, what's up?
Um, for adoption, we had an interesting sort of sneaky backdoor where we're in a big org with lots of different products that are using the system, and there was a mandate for accessibility.
Hmm.
And so we used the accessibility backdoor to go, well, you could implement the accessibility fixes in your product on your own without the system, or you can use our components to get some of that for you. And then you get a little bit of that. Well, is it going to be the same or less energy to just adopt the system at this point than to like, do it yourself in your whatever stuff you've got in product that isn't system?
Yeah.
So we had a little bit of a sneaky sort of combination of factors that helped us get that done, and having legal sort of forcing the issue is kind of helpful.
That helps.
In
Yeah,
this
for
case.
sure.
So, and we had sort of started to invest in accessibility. We created a whole new team and staffed that up so that they could help with all that and make sure that we get that stuff into the system, et cetera, and help teams adopt and all that jazz. So
Yeah, that's great. And there's lots of, I feel like it's not only accessibility that works in that way. I don't know, Lauren, have you had other sort of like org-wide mandates that aren't system related that have helped you get system adoption going?
Well, I think it's really interesting because what Greg is kind of describing is like a Trojan horse, where like system adoption is hiding inside of something that the business cares deeply about, whether that's a legal requirement or something else that leadership is really passionate about. And what I found most successful is like really tuning into what matters for the business and what they care about, and then like crafting your message to be like, and this is why the system is going to unlock that. But if you're like standing on a soapbox advocating for something that they don't care about, then it kind of falls on deaf ears. And accessibility is one that's very successful because like many companies go through a moment where it becomes like a hard requirement with a deadline.
Yeah.
And it can be achieved as like a 1-2 punch.
Right. Yeah, I love that. Rebrands, another one. I think somebody was mentioning that earlier,
Yeah. So like I think in my experience, I've found that if leadership cares really about quality and craft, I can make a system that's like really beautiful. And then it's like, oh, of course, you want to work with the people that are doing the highest craft work. And then leadership is like, oh, like, how can I get everyone to ship beautiful things like this? Then you kind of naturally get people to adopt. And that kind of goes back to the top-down pressure that I was talking about, that wasn't necessarily a mandate. Maybe at times there's a mandate if there's like a large rebrand moment in there, but it can also just organically happen through top-down pressure that's like passionate about the thing that you're selling.
Yeah. Michael, what's up?
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
I sort of had a thought, and I want to voice it and sort of get people's sort of thoughts on that. I almost think that there's sort of two cultures to think about. There's like an internal culture and an external culture. And I'd like to sort of define those a little bit quickly. I think the external culture is sort of working on the culture at the company that design systems are valuable and usable and necessary, sort of like the almost evangelizing the concept of design systems, right? And getting people on the ground doing the work, the designers and developers building the products, knowing about the system, caring about the system, adopting the system on their own without the mandate. I also think there's like an internal culture of how the design system teams build their products that matters as well, so that they can build something that is effective. Because I think it's important to call out that design systems are enterprise tools, and the most terrible thing is to be mandated to use a tool that sucks. And enterprise tools are very guilty of this, I think, a lot, probably because of the mandate. And so I think it's important to call out the internal culture of the team too. Needs to be a culture in such that you're building things with the consumer experience in mind and flexibility in mind, and sort of building what teams need. Because if you get too far into the mandate and sort of like too high, you put yourself on too high your own podium because you're sort of mandated from the enterprise, you may sort of say, we're the arbiters of the rules, we make all the decisions, we don't have to ask our consumers, right? And then you'll end up in a situation of being the enterprise tool that nobody wants to use because they didn't ask anybody what to make and they made all the wrong choices. So I just want to call out that I think there's two cultures. There's an internal one and an external one, and you need both the top down and the bottom up. So you need the mandate and the culture, but you kind of need two cultures both, I think.
Yeah, like nobody wants to be in a job where they're just saying no all the time, or in a job where they're having to like check people's work all the time, like put a stamp on it. Both of those jobs sound miserable.
Yeah. It's funny, Lauren, because I'm thinking about your talk from Config, where you were like, the gist of it was sort of like, hey, let go a little bit, like let teams do cool shit with your work. But also there were, I remember the first venue you talked about, when you walk in, it's like really clear what the rules are, the expectations are. So do you feel that balance is sort of what we're hearing from Michael?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think like you always need to be able to empathize with who your customer is. And like without that empathy, and really understanding like their needs and the service that you provide to them and getting alignment on like how you guys are working together, then it's like there's just no trust between it.
Yeah. And it takes me to this diagram. I had sort of sketched this out after reading some of the stories from y'all, where it was like, I think last episode with Tony Ann, we talked a lot about this idea of baking good stuff into your system. And we talked a lot about sort of training, like enabling folks to make good choices, but we really didn't talk much about enforcement. So I sort of brought that in with all three of these layers. And I think, Michael, what I'm hearing you say is it's not one or the other, it's all of this, right? So we have to bake some really smart defaults in. I think there was a really cool answer that basically was talking about how even just like choosing to make something as a slot is like opening up like to trust a consuming team to make really good choices about what they put in there, and so like that is a way we can embed a level of flexibility into our work. Then we have to there's this whole layer of culture. It's like training and teaching and supporting and all that other stuff that we know is so important. And then there's trust but verify. So what is the next layer of like making sure that the stuff that's going out actually meets our bar of quality? And I would say, if I look historically at system teams, we started out with this idea of enforcement. That was kind of like what we, like a decade ago, that's kind of like everybody's interfaces were a mess. We're like, we need somebody to fix it. Let's rein it in, But we've learned, I think, over time to let go a bit. So that's sort of what this is trying to represent. Lauren, you had a note here. Oh yeah. So share a little bit about this and then we'll get going.
I know. Okay, yeah. Um, I agree with you. I actually think that there's like seasons of enforcing and seasons of enabling
Yeah.
and seasons of embedding, and it depends on like the maturity and like the volume of adoption. I know that at Cash App, when we went from no system to a system, there was a lot more rigidity in the system that we were providing, and a lot more like um, maybe enforcing to get people onto that standard. And once we were on that standard, we were like, okay, we see all these kind of ways that we need to be more flexible. And so as we were kind of getting adoption, we continued to add flexibility. And my thinking around flexibility is like, you need a system with an opinion, but you can still have flexibility. But if you have a system that's flexible with no opinion, then it's almost the same as having no system at all. But my note above is like, I feel really empowered that I can put some of this enforcement now on agents. And I used to be like, oh, we'll build this Figma plugin where users can test the contrast ratios, or users can check to see if it's on system. And like, nobody does that. No, people barely accept changes to Figma libraries. And so now that we can introduce skills that agents are running through, or like linters, we can have that part of like an automation that never feels like a human is enforcing things on people, but instead it's just part of the build process.
Yeah. Love that. Guy, what's up?
Hey, I wanted to talk a bit more about culture because for me, this is the critical thing. And I agree with everything everyone said, and I want to add a bit more. I think, Peter, you talked about the sort of the internal versus the external. And I see it as different layers of culture. And maybe the top is like, the design system team itself. And that's the one that I actually have, control over. I can decide like how we show up, how we work with other people. But then you have the design org, and then you have other people consuming the design system, and then you have the organization, the whole company in general. And if the culture of the company is, in quotes, broken, nothing else will work, or it's going to be an uphill battle all the time. Because I'm not even talking about how do our consumers like to, how mature is their design capability, how open they are to trying new things. When they see something isn't working, are they just going to say, nope, not going to use it, or are they thinking creatively? But if the company itself has a culture of no one talks to anyone else, that sets the tone for everything.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I
Yeah.
actually,
Go ahead,
you
Lauren.
go, Ben.
No, please.
What Guy was saying reminded me of something that I like wrote in my journal that really helped me survive like a really difficult culture. And it was separate your ability to do your best work from the company's ability to do its best work. And so I think like the shape and form that these things take is dependent on the environment in which you're doing them in. And that's going to shift at every company and like the quality of the culture that you're in.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good. Those are such good points, Guy and Lauren. I feel like the sum of these layers is sort of the culture, right? Like you can have different amounts of each in different seasons, and that's going to form sort of how people feel about the work and how they feel they have permission or not to veer from it. So super cool. This actually kind of leads me into another question, which kind of gets to the AI side of this, Lauren, that you were hinting at earlier, which is this idea of like, is it possible for us to design the conditions where good choices emerge naturally, right? Like, I think I've always imagined as an idealist, self-proclaimed idealist, that I want to invest in the people and just help them make really good choices, right? Like, I want to design that capability and train folks and invest in those individuals. But if we're in this world where AI is just like everybody's just like scrambling to try and like do things fast with automation and AI, like, is that even possible anymore? So do you have thoughts on that, Lauren?
I mean, I think Peter made a comment in the chat that I agree with, which is like, I think that if you're set up for success with your tooling, AI makes it easier because
Mm-hmm.
humans have a natural tendency to want to break out of the mold, particularly designers, I think. Like that is part of the design process is like detaching components. And every time an engineer tells me that like I need to get designers to stop detaching, I'm like, that's just part of the design process. But when you
Yeah.
start in a prototyping environment close to production with agents that are trained on your system, they start with the system first, and then it's harder to deviate. And it's more intentional when you are deviating, I think. But I'd be curious to hear from other people that maybe have a culture that's going prototyping first.
Yeah. Let's hear from folks who are doing that. I was just talking with somebody earlier today who's basically the workflow is their product managers are prototyping everything. And those get handed to engineers to go build. And then there's questions about what the heck they're actually building. They go to design and UX folks, and they're having to untangle all these prototypes and being like, wait, this isn't where'd you get this? you know? And so, I think there's ways that can work, but we have to include the right people in the process.
Yeah. I mean, like I'm tasked with this right now at my current job. And my approach is that I'm first building prototyping tools for designers. And then once they feel like really solid in those workflows, then
Mhm.
we figure out ways to expand that group to people that maybe aren't design first. But I think that the awesome part about having people in these tools as designers right now is they start to believe in the value of design systems more than any other time in my career.
Mhm.
And it's a huge relief because it's just like, it just naturally starts to click with them when they're trying to build in that way.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like the system enables them to do even more with the tools. you know.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
Figma used to be this workflow. And like my former boss spoke about this on stage at Config. And that was a very challenging culture moment for me. Former boss, I hope I said
Yeah.
that. And his approach was like start wild and then snap to the system when you go into handoff.
Mhm.
And that is just a backwards mentality to the way we're working today, I think.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
start in the system and it's like more natural.
Rebecca.
Yeah. I think you kind of like going on with that, like you want the system to be intrinsically motivating. You want people to use it because they see the value of it and not because you told them to. And like I feel that way when people tell me I have to do something, it's like I want to understand why. And if the reason is because the CEO said I had to, like I hate that. And so I try to like think of that, you know, through the consumer's eyes of like give them, and it's frustrating when you see the value but they don't, like you're coming at it from different angles. But if you can come up with things that will make it valuable for them, like it works better with the AI, like they can, you know, or like someone was bringing up dark mode. Like I've been finding that motivating too. Like you don't have to worry about dark mode because that's such a pain to have to think through. And so trying to come up with the thing that's going to make them want to use it and see the value and not just because you told them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Whew, for sure.
It's interesting that you mentioned values, you know, because I think it's like the systems team can sometimes have different values than the consumers, and like values kind of get all turned on their head when we think about different workflows and different archetypes of our consumers. And so it's like I'm always trying to find, if I'm working with someone who's like specifically challenging, I'm like, okay, what does this person value and how can I like shape my story to be like, oh, this unlocks the thing you're looking for.
Yeah.
It's a mind game though.
Yeah. And it's funny because this is like, that's not the thing we studied, right? Like all that work of like the politics of understanding motivations and incentives and all that stuff. That's like, we just want to make stuff. So then it's like you find ourselves in these roles where you can't make stuff that gets used unless you do all of that work too, you know? And it's sometimes like mentally exhausting, but what else, folks? What else do we want to cover here? There's, tons more information. Like if you look through like if we were to skip to question 4 and like there, I try to gather like categorize like the big themes from the stories folks told. There were about 16 that had this idea of like letting go paid off, you know, which is kind of how Lauren kicked us off. So I loved that. Um, eight folks said we never had any control to begin with, so there was nothing to relinquish, which I think I've heard that feeling too. So lots of these interesting stories and some good quotes down here. Jeff, what's on your mind?
Yeah, before we moved on, I just wanted to mention that I shared in the resources section a resource that I also learned about at Config, because I think it's really relevant to what we were just talking about, where, you know, I think this kind of vibe coding is happening all day, every day, everywhere. And I think this is the best explanation. It's a huge white paper. That Kaggle link is the white paper, but Addy Osmoney summarizes it pretty well in that blog post. And really, it's a spectrum. What they're defining is you have vibe coding on one end of the spectrum and then agentic engineering all the way on the other end of the spectrum. And so vibe coding is much more like prototyping and throwaway code, and agentic engineering is like you've got all of these human gates and you know, checks in place so that it's really something that you would be much more likely to push to production. So I just wanted to share that with everybody, and also just wanted to mention it's really helpful to me to hear some of these stories that everybody is describing, because I'm kind of going through the same process at work right now, where I'm taking like a two-pronged approach of like writing a business plan, you know, executive summary, aligning it to the company goals of like, you know, we need to strengthen operational reliability and work efficiently, or like customer experience type stuff, but then also going and talking to individuals, because at some point if I'm going to propose web components, I'm going to have to go through this thing called the ARB, which is an architecture review board, which reminds me of like the Sphinx Gate from the Neverending Story. You know, it's like, so I want to talk to everybody that's on that ARB individually before I get in front of them, and I'm like, hey guys, let's use this, because we've got
whole bunch of different systems, all, a whole bunch of acquisitions, and like, let's try to have one system that's unified to support the entire organization.
Oh yeah. There's a ton of value in ARBs, but they can also be an absolute cluster.
Yeah, you got to go and talk to everybody individually first and like build
It's
relationships.
politics. Yeah, it's
yep.
politics. Yep. Oh gosh, lots of chat happening, folks. Bring those conversations to the stage here. What's on your mind? I saw this big thread about prototyping, and we've talked about leadership seeing an amazing prototype, thinking it's ready for prod. Bane of our existence often. What else? Go ahead, Michael.
As a dev, I can sort of dig in a little bit, I think, to the agentic side of things, with an observation that I kind of maybe see happening, which I think is yet to determine where the importance of design systems is going to land. I think the first thing I want to say is, like, I think we have to get past the hype train first, and I think we're still definitely in the hype train in terms of AI. My personal take on it is that, having used AI tools, I think they're massively oversold. I don't think that makes them not useful. I think that they are massively oversold. The agentic pipelines that I have seen, especially when it comes to like front ends work, that where design systems tend to live, don't tend to go that well. they don't tend to be everything that was promised, right? But that doesn't stop people from sort of recommending things. And one thing that worries me about the direction that we could be heading is that usage of agentic tools also comes along with a recommendation to sort of stop looking at and caring about the output, right? I view that as sort of a way to make AI seem great, because if you don't look at what it is under the covers, that it just did what it did and it kind of looks like it worked, then maybe it is great. But when you do start to look at things that are under the hood, like accessibility, like bundle size, like performance, like, all those things that we sort of want to value, I think the cracks will start to show, but we have to keep caring. And so the question is, are we going to keep caring? I don't know that anyone knows the answer to that. I do feel like people sort of, like, on the edge of the hype train are pushing people to stop caring. And I think there is a little bit of a pushback on that to sort of keep caring. Design systems stay relevant, I think, both if you keep caring and you have a culture of keeping on caring about the output, and if the agentic solutions aren't actually what they say they are, right? If agentic solutions are perfection, then you might see and you also stop caring about it, then the design system, I think, might lose its value, because why would I need to pull a component off the shelf when I can just have that token tool make it right there in front of me, right?
Yeah.
And it would end up being the same effect. I think the design system still will have lots of value if it isn't the same effect, and if the AI version is worse.
Yeah. It's interesting, Michael, because I know that there are folks who do care, actually, and are craftspeople who have built agentic workflows that create very high quality output too. And so I think the amount of work it takes to do that, at that stage at this stage is a lot still. There's a whole lot of very intentional work that goes into that. And you could see some folks talking about looping and validation and all those sorts of tools that people are using now to like actually create good output. But caring is a distinctly human thing, right? And so that's where, like, we have to bake that into these loops, into these workflows, in meaningful ways. Kele, I'm super excited to hear what you have to say about this.
Yeah, sorry. We all know where I'm going to land on this, I think, already. But I think I completely echo the idea that it's been wildly oversold for what it's capable of doing in a lot of circumstances. And again, that doesn't even mean that I'm saying that it has no value. I think there are places where it has value, but I think a lot of the people who I'm seeing do things that are very polished and very flashy are like 0 to 1 builds in small systems where people are like, I went and sat at my computer and came up with an idea that was cool and didn't have to worry about stakeholders and built a thing in a vacuum. And like, that's really neat. But where that doesn't happen quite as cleanly, at least in my experience, is I stepped into a new company and that company's been building things for 30 years and they have people working in 15 different repos and no one uses the same stuff. And there's a design system, but it's not very mature or it's not very flexible or it's not built as well as we'd want it to be built. And so now there's all these mandates from leadership to say, like, use more AI, prototype everything. And people try to plug into a system that is just not capable of that and then get absolute hot slop as an output. And then everyone is like super frustrated because the answer is just go faster, use more tools, but also
Yeah.
don't spend any money on tokens either. So like
Yeah.
it's a rock and a hard place for people because I think there are people who care so deeply about good work and like a positive user experience and all of that stuff that we've always cared about as designers and good engineers, like good designers and good engineers. That wasn't a call out an engineer, sorry. But like, I think right now people are just being told like, go faster and use the tools and they expect magic. And when they're not getting it, they're like, well, the system doesn't work. And I
Yeah.
think that just sets everyone up for so much disappointment, which is a huge bummer.
Yeah.
I actually think that like that inspires the thought I put into this framework over here around influence and authority, and particularly in this moment in time, it's something that I have grappled with for the last 6 months, kind of since these tools have been pushed so hard. And it's like at my last job, I was on the wrong side of the influence in these tools, and now I joined a new company and I'm like decidedly choosing to exist in this influence and authority corner as the systems leader, like kind of putting my voice in the room for how we're using these tools, what tools to use, what that means for the system. And it feels like I'm set up for much more success in that way versus the system not being in those conversations when people are saying, use these tools. Because leadership's understanding of the tools and leadership's understanding of the system just aren't matched.
Yeah, so that's such a good point. Well, if you are in the Fig Jam with us, find that top right corner and place a stamp where you think your team is currently operating. Would love to see just very lo-fi kind of general like where folks are operating. You can press the E key to get your stamp tool up. Alicia, we haven't heard from you yet. What's on your mind?
Hey, so AI is trained on what it can be trained on. And if you're using a publicly accessible model, it's probably trained on a lot of simple or simpler e-commerce sites. And we're working on like super complex enterprise software. And I feel like sometimes the output is just not what we need. Executives see something that looks polished and shiny and they're like, it's great, let's go for it. And also how nervous should we be? Also, we work in healthcare. There's a lot of like legal things that like we shouldn't be giving Claude the keys to everything, and people just seem like not worried enough about that. I have a lot of concerns about that. And are we prompting ourselves out of jobs is a whole thing. But also like is AI actually trained on things that will be helpful for the work that you're doing if you're using a more publicly accessible AI model? And if your company is not bought into building anything for their own use, they only want an off-the-shelf solution.
Good points. Greg, jump in.
A lot of what I've been thinking about, I guess, since before config, but even reinforced more through that and through, being a participant in the question is like everything's context now. Like you have to ask the right questions, and even when you have assumptions, you have to challenge your own assumptions and think about, well, is there something I'm not thinking about that I need to like? And it just becomes this whole sort of quicksand that you start to get into. And when I hear things like what Alicia's talking about, I hear that a lot too, like even in my own org, like this sentiment of like, well, I tried this thing and it didn't work kind of thing. And my first reaction is always, well, can we add more context to it so it can do a better job? Which, not Like even in my org, like we don't have enough people working on that infrastructure, and that
Yeah.
infrastructure has layers. There's system layer stuff, there's product layer stuff, and it all has to be orchestrated well to work.
Yeah.
And AI is not going to do that for you. You have to add that context in, and like that kind of goes into the, like I dropped this. I'm not going to get deep into it, but I dropped a post-it note near the layers of governance, and what we've experienced in the past for like systems, I feel like we're now re-experiencing with systems teams being kind of pressured to be the ones trying to organize those layers of context
Yeah.
that AI is given. And people are just assuming that, oh, well, they wrote all the documentation, it's all done. And
Yeah.
it's not done. Like there's a lot of gaps, stuff
Right.
we should have made before that we didn't take that approach because it was like, well, let's not document the things we don't want people to do, or all sorts of other logical things in the right context. But
Yeah.
the context has changed, so everything's changing, which
Yeah.
is
Good points,
wild.
Greg. And humans can sort of infer a lot of things, like we're picking up all these cues from meetings and conversations, decades at companies, So, Peter, I'm excited to get your voice into here because I know you have a different view on some of this.
I have a very different view on a lot of this stuff, but not necessarily combatively so, which is new for me. So a lot of the experiences that people have described in the last series of shares have not been really my experience at all. And I think it comes down to some core ideas. One, we are expecting AI to know how to use a system kind of coming out of a box. Like you basically kind of prompt, you have a system, and then like the AI knows to check your code and pull out the things. No. AI understand the holistic model, the public model kind of idea that you just go into Claude and just prompt your way through it. Yeah, it understands the ideas of a design system, but it does not understand your design system. You do have to build the layers of context. You do have to build the tooling to be able to access those things. You do need to layer in kind of the direction about using logical properties to put accessibility as a first-class citizen, to prevent that slop. You can't simply just like have code base, have AI look at your code base, kind of direct it to the system and say, I know how to use the system now. It doesn't work like that. And those layers of context that you have, like you wrote them, like, I had never really invested in a lot of documentation before because humans never read it. And so it seemed like the worst use of my time, from a portionate, one person shop, right? So, but now I spend more time writing documentation for AI agents more than anything else. And I actually have them author it but I go in and kind of edit my way through it. That is because AI needs a different type of documentation, a different method of documentation. And that has to be structured in a way. And look, I've been working on Designer Punk for a year. And it is at that point where it's doing all those things that was promised, but like that, it took a year of overworking to try to make this thing work. So it is, yes, we have been sold that AI can do all these things, and we were oversold on the rate at which it will happen, but it is not oversold on the promise of what it can do, so long as you provided the methodology, the means, and the access and the tools to be able to accomplish those tasks.
Nice. Good. It's awesome to hear another perspective. And that's one of the things I love about this forum, which is that we can come with lots of different ideas on the spectrum of what a concept like this and bring those in a way to sort of like expand each other's perspectives. So Peter, thanks for sharing that. And Kelly and others, thanks for sharing, and Michael for sharing your experiences as well. Lauren, I want to give you the last word. Anything else you want to say here?
I mean, everything seems to come back to us talking about AI recently,
know.
which is funny. But I think my reflection in like the last conversation is like all the things we're struggling with right now are the same struggles we had years ago with humans. And now we're just pivoting to a new user, and the old tools and techniques didn't necessarily work. And it's just fun to watch kind of us all evolve together.
Yeah. And that's why we are trying to be more intentional with conversations like this. So we'll continue to have those Thank you all so much for coming with openness for the conversation. Tons of good materials down here. Lauren posted a handful of a couple of her talks, most recent. So if you missed her talk from Config this year, please go watch it. It is phenomenal. You will really enjoy that. Redwood's design system community is open. You can get signed up there today. A bunch of the folks here are in that community, and we talk about this kind of thing every day, every week. All the episode edits from last episode are done with Tony Ann. This was a great conversation. So there's a podcast for the deep dive and for the recap, and then there's YouTube for both of those as well. I wrote a little article about some of the things I learned from that episode here. Lots of other articles from the Redwoods community posted, and then other articles from the larger systems community as well. So please get involved. Keep coming back to the question. We can't do this without y'all. And Lauren, you rock. Thank you so much for doing another episode with me.
You rock, Ben. See y'all.
Cheers, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Question. Remember, you can get access to the raw data, the collaborative Fig Jam, and all of the recordings for this episode and many more on my website, bencallahan.com. If you or your team could use an outside perspective in your design system efforts, I'd be honored to support you in that way. There's more information about my coaching and consulting offerings over on the site. And of course, if you need a hand building a sustainable design system program, my studio, Sparkbox, is standing by ready to partner. Hiring Sparkbox is an investment in your design system and your team. Reach out and let's see if there's a good fit. Thanks for being here, and remember, stay in learning mode.